Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink and getting back into my Christmas card series. Today's cards I made several of because they were very easy. I started with the Suzy's SNOWMEN. These are pre-printed watercolor cards that you can get from Simon Says Stamp, and I'll have a link to them. With pretty much every new release, they have at least a full set from Suzy with different themes and whatnot, and I've done videos on other ones in the past. So for these ones, like I said, they're the SNOWMEN ones, and I am using Nuvo's masking fluid just to mask off different areas. Now, if you've never used masking fluid before, the main idea with masking fluid or liquid frisket, it can go by both names, is it's meant to preserve detailed white areas that are very difficult to paint around, and it's just easier to mask those areas off before you go in with paint, watercolor, etc. And then when you're done your whole project, you can rub off the masking fluid and that area is preserved in white. So I'm going to do both with this though. I'm going to preserve areas to stay white, but I'm also, like how I'm doing it on the scarf here, I'm also preserving areas to make it easier to paint around, and then when I remove the masking fluid, I can paint them the color I want. So it's a convenience thing for me. Now with the Nuvo one, it comes with their, typical fine tip applicator, which I actually really like. I don't think I've ever had a masking fluid like this. Usually they come in little like containers that you would just dip into, or you have to pour into another small container. So I kind of like that it has the, fine tip. So you can do one of two things with this. You can either apply it with the fine tip, which I did at the very beginning there, and that works fine. Or you can squeeze it into a little palette or a little scrap of something just to hold it, something non-porous. So I just squeezed it onto an acrylic block. You only want to squeeze out a very small amount. This does dry fairly quickly, and whatever you squeeze out, you're not getting back in the container. So you don't need much. It also, FYI, it does contain latex. They have that info on the bottle. That's part of the rubbery properties of this. And another method, like I said, you can squeeze it out and then you can apply it with a brush. But FYI, whatever brush you're going to use with it, you're pretty much going to ruin the brush because it dries into the hairs of the brush. So I'm using actually one of my smallest Nuvo brushes because the set had 12 and I don't need all 12. So I'm using the smallest one. And this brush is now dedicated to using with masking fluid because it's wrecked. There are, I think some people have said you can swirl a brush in soap and let it harden, and then that'll kind of help preserve the brush. But honestly, I kind of keep a dedicated brush for something like this, and I don't worry about it. And I never use my really expensive brushes with masking fluid. So depending on your area, how long it takes to dry. These I let dry overnight only because I got busy with kids and life and everything else. But I always find that masking fluid doesn't take very long to dry. Like, depending on how thick you apply it, like 20 minutes. You only just need to apply just a nice thin coat. You don't need to really glop it on, but a nice thin coat does it. So for all of these, I coated the little little snowball-y snowflake images on all the backgrounds because that is something I do not like painting around. That takes too long. I am lazy. So masking those off makes my life so much easier. Same with these words. I masked all those words, just filled them in with the masking fluid, let it dry. And then again, I can just paint right over it and not have to worry about it. So you could get really technical and mask off the outer edges of all the snowmen. You could really, mask off everything if you wanted. But I only chose certain little things that I just didn't want to bother painting around. And then all my painting was still very, very simple. I'm just using my little Prima Tropicals palette. I decided to stick to one palette because I did end up doing 6 of these panels. I wanted to do the full set, but as usual, I just didn't have enough time to do all of them. But I did the 6 panels using just this one palette, and pretty much I think I used a larger brush for all the backgrounds, but for the main coloring, I just stuck with one of my little Nuvo brushes. And I would just go along and paint. And then depending on what you're doing, but no matter what, you always want to make sure everything is dry before you remove the masking fluid. If you've painted a wet area and there's masking fluid there, that needs to be dry before you remove the masking fluid, because one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to tear your paper or you're going to smear watercolor paint, whatever you're using. So you always want to make sure everything's dry. So I would sometimes use a heat tool to make sure everything was dry. And then you can either remove masking fluid with your fingers, or you could use an adhesive remover eraser. I find with the Nuvo masking fluid, it removes super easily. Like, I literally just rub my fingers against it. It kind of rolls up like in a little ball. There's something really satisfying about using this. So it comes off super easily. So I just like to roll it with my fingers. I just rub my finger against it, kind of roll it off. Sometimes you can pull it, like you start pulling it off and it'll come off that way. I like doing that, but I don't, because there's chances you could tear cardstock doing that. So I like to just roll it off with my fingers and it's good to go. So with all of these, like with this specific one, all those areas I'd masked off were areas I wanted to color different colors. It just made painting the background and whatnot so much faster and easier having them masked off. So once I remove that masking fluid, I can now go in and paint like the ornaments and the trunk of that little tree and the little star and the band to his little earmuffs. And I even masked off the little frill on the end of his scarf there. It just made the painting that background so much quicker, made everything go a lot smoother. So then I just go in, fill in on everything, and then set that aside to dry. And I just keep repeating this process. Like, I either paint, then remove more masking fluid, or I remove the masking and then paint that area that I'd already masked off, like I did here with these words. Removed all of the masking fluid, and then I'm just going to paint them all. And I kept my painting, again, really, really simple. I didn't do anything fancy. I didn't do layering and add any depth or anything like that. I just filled everything in. And then in the end, to kind of add to it, as well as it just gives it that extra thing, because anyone who knows me knows I love the splatter. I'm going to add a whole bunch of white splatter because it's a nice snow scene, which makes it more fun too. But these were definitely something that, you know, you could almost take on the go with you. I was going to. And I was like, wait, I need to film this. So for me, it kind of sucks sometimes that I can't just like, you know, take all my camera equipment on the go, because that's not convenient at all. But it was fun to just kind of sit, get Netflix going, and just kind of sit and paint and like fill these in. And, you know, everything's already done because the images were already drawn. They're already on the watercolor paper. So all I have to do is either mask off or just start painting. So that's exactly what I did. And I would just go from one image to the next and kind of work in my little assembly line style. So, and like I said, I stuck with this Tropicals palette, which had all the colors you need. The only thing it didn't have was black, but I will show how you can achieve that. You can achieve that with any watercolor palette that you might have. So on this one, this is the one where I masked off the little snow, you know, falling snow little bits, but I also masked off all those dots on his scarf, because those sorts of images, they can be such a pain sometimes to color, especially with watercolor, because it can take forever to, you know, go around every little bit. So by masking them off, it just saved me a ton of time. So I moved the little snow bits here, and then I'm going to go along and I decided they're going to be in like basically matching little purple toques and scarves. So I'm going to go around and just fill in all of this. And when I get to the penguin, this is obviously, he needs to be black. All you do is basically just mix every single color together. Mix them all together and intensify it. In the lower right of my palette there, you can kind of see I've got almost a black going on, and that was just a mixture of random colors. And I'm just going to keep adding to that until I get it black. So it's really, really simple. You just kind of keep adding to it, add some red, add some green. When you add all these like colors, and at first it's going to just look muddy. You know, you're going to have this brown, murky sort of thing, but then when it starts getting murky, add some red, add some green, add some blue, add a bit of brown, whatever you've got. And I just kept adding to it, and it turned black. So that's all I did. And then I could paint my little penguin, and I've got the perfect little black. So I use it for the penguin. I also use it on, I think, one of the hats on the snowman as well. It just came in really handy. So I went along, painted his little body, let the purple areas completely dry. Everything is dry. You always want to test, especially the areas where you can see where I've got like purple paint on top of those dots, like on top of the masking fluid. I made sure that was dry before I rubbed my fingers against it. Otherwise I would have smeared purple everywhere, which normally I would do. So make sure it's dry. It'll look as if anything sitting on top of the masking fluid will look wet. So always like very gently test it, because it can look wet, but it's actually dry. Because it always throws me off, and it's like, oh, it looks, you know, glossy wet, but it's because it's sitting on top of that dried rubbery masking fluid. So always make sure everything is dry before you remove it and end up ruining, you know, all the work you put into something. So after I removed all that masking fluid, I am just going to finish filling everything in and adding the last bits of color to this. Deciding to go with kind of a greeny aqua sort of a color here. Like I was just sticking with this palette, but like kind of mixing and matching, and you get so many colors out of one little set of watercolors. So again, here I'm using that, you know, black murky mess I had created to create a perfect black here. And then with this one, I had masked off the star on the tree as well as all the little ornaments on the tree. Since I'm going to be painting, you know, this large green area, it made it easier to have those ornaments masked off. And I did also mask off the holly. It wasn't totally necessary, but I just did it because I could and I had everything out. So that made painting this tree a whole lot easier. Again, I didn't have to, you know, work around the ornaments. I could just paint and not worry about it. So painted that whole tree, and then would kind of jump around and color different areas of things just to give everything, you know, more time to dry. It just makes everything go a lot smoother. And then again, once everything is dry, then I can start removing the masking fluid. So I'm going to remove the little star, paint that, again, make sure everything's dry, and then I can remove the masking fluid on top of the holly and the ornaments, and then I can paint those, and this image is going to be done too. So all of these images, after I finish painting them, like I said, I'm going to splatter with, I use white gouache for the splatter, and I make a huge mess doing that. I had fun making these. So I think I had with all of them, because I didn't do my backgrounds perfectly. You know, I didn't tape anything down. I didn't keep, you know, a perfectly smooth, perfect, you know, background, mostly because, as always, I'm running behind. I don't have time, and I want to create all the things and color all the backgrounds, and I couldn't settle on just, if I did just one card, I could have put in more effort, more time, more finesse, more layers, etc. But I wanted to do so many of them because I was like, ooh, I really love this one. It's so cute. And then, oh, this one's really adorable. And oh, I like the sentiment on this one. So I did several. And this is one way, though, to kind of mask that when your backgrounds aren't perfect. Like you can see, I've kind of got blooming going on there and it's not even or consistent. Adding splatter, especially if it's a snow scene, because it just makes it perfect. But even with other types of, you know, scenes of watercolor, you know, I like to add my splatter. It just depends. That really helps, it adds that texture and kind of takes away from other things. So I just mix white gouache onto another acrylic block with a bit of water just to thin it down a little bit. And then I go to town with a splatter. And it was dripping off the block because I made too much at once. And for the really big splatters there, I just quickly dab that up with a paper towel and you can't even tell. Like if you move quick enough, you can dab that up and it's not going to ruin anything. But then I do it again, like literally in the exact same spot too. It's like, some days I can't even learn. So then I like paid more attention to where, you know, everything was sitting on that block so I could go along and splatter. I, you know, used a bit of cardboard to kind of protect my work surface here, but I still literally get it everywhere. But again, it's fun. So I get everything splattered, you know, do all this at once, and then I can clean out my brush to make sure that doesn't dry in my brush. And then I let all of these backgrounds completely dry, which again doesn't take very long because gouache mixed with water dries pretty quickly, but I let it all fully dry. And then I die cut every single one of these panels with either the largest of the wonky rectangles wafer dies or the largest of the stitched rectangle wafer dies. And then I'm going to adhere all of these to just heavyweight white card bases. And I know, shocker, I don't add anything to the insides. I ran out of time. Life just took a little bit of a curveball for me. So that finished off my cards for today. As always, I will have a link below to my blog post with a supply list and links to all the supplies used, so you can check that out below if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!